Have you ever felt trapped in pain, burdens, and difficulties that seemed impossible to escape? You've prayed, you've waited, but everything still feels stuck? Pause for a moment, because when God moves, nothing can stand in his way. In this video, Eternal Light will take you on a journey to discover the absolute power of God's deliverance. He didn't just open the prison doors for Paul and Silas long ago. Today, he can also break every chain that is holding you back. Watch until the end to receive a powerful encouragement, because once you understand how God sets you free, you will never be imprisoned by fear, doubt, or failure again. Ready to be set free? Watch now. The sky is not always crystal clear, and the white clouds never drift lazily forever like a still painting. Life is the same. There are days full of sunshine, but there are also days of storms. Sometimes life feels like a golden rice field basking under the sun, but at other times it seems no different from a dense, shadowy forest with no clear path forward. Have you ever felt like you were drowning in a stormy sea? Amidst the raging waves, you struggle desperately, searching for something to cling to, but there seems to be nothing within reach. Those days might come when you lose a loved one, when your career crumbles, when illness strikes unexpectedly, or when a relationship you thought would last forever shatters right before your eyes. We often think we are strong, that if we just try harder, if we persevere, everything will eventually be okay. But life is not that simple. There are trials that exceed human strength, pains that no amount of effort can heal. In those moments, people often find themselves caught in a whirlwind of anxiety and fear, frantically searching for a way out, without realizing that sometimes the only solution is to surrender to the embrace of God. There is a verse in the Bible that anyone who has ever walked through the darkest days should remember. With man, this is impossible, but with God, all things are possible. Matthew 19, verse 26. This verse is not just a word of encouragement. It is an unchanging truth, proven throughout thousands of years. We limit our possibilities to what we can see, but God is not bound by anything. He is almighty, the one who turns the impossible into possible, the one who creates a path even in places where no way forward seems to exist. I remember reading a story in the Bible about a widow, a story that is not just a miracle, but also a lesson in faith. This woman lived during the time of the prophet Elisha. Her husband had passed away, leaving behind 2 young sons and a massive debt. The creditor wasted no time demanding repayment and even threatened to take her sons as slaves. She had nothing left except for a small jar of oil. A jar of oil, how could that be enough to feed her children, let alone pay off an enormous debt? To human eyes, this was a hopeless situation, but to God, it was an opportunity to display his power. The widow, in her desperation, sought Elisha. She had no one else to turn to but God. Elisha told her to do something strange. Go to her neighbors, borrow as many empty jars as possible, bring them home, and start pouring oil into them. It was an instruction that made no sense. How could a small jar of oil possibly fill many jars? But she did not question it. She obeyed. And then the miracle happened. The oil kept flowing, filling jar after jar until there were no more left to fill. Only then did the oil stop. She sold the oil, paid off her debt, and still had enough left to provide for her family. Had she only focused on what she had, she would never have dared to believe in a miracle. Had she refused to follow Elisha's words, had she doubted God's power, her oil would have remained just a small jar, and her sons might have been taken as slaves. But she placed her trust in God, and he did not let her down. Have you ever felt like that widow? Have you ever looked at your situation and thought, there is no way out? Have you ever felt so helpless that you wanted to give up? But remember, God does not need much to perform a miracle. He does not require you to have great wealth, extraordinary abilities, or unmatched intelligence. He only asks for a heart that trusts him. A small jar of oil in the hands of a believer can become an endless supply when placed in God's hands. Everyone has their own small jar of oil. Perhaps it is a talent that seems insignificant, a modest savings account, an unstable job, or even just a fragile glimmer of hope deep inside. But do not be discouraged. Do not shut the door on faith. Do not focus on your limitations and forget that you serve a limitless God. There was a boy in the Bible who one afternoon gave Jesus 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. He never imagined that his simple meal would feed more than 5,000 people. But Jesus did the unimaginable. He blessed the little food and turned it into a feast of abundance. A small jar of oil, 5 loaves, and 2 fish. These seemingly insignificant things became miracles when placed in the hands of God. So today, what is your small jar of oil? What is weighing on your heart, making you feel powerless? Is it mounting debt? A sickness that seems incurable? A dream that has faded over time? Or a wound in your heart that refuses to heal? Remember, God is still working. He has never stopped performing miracles. If you trust Him, if you refuse to limit Him with your doubts, you will see the impossible become possible. You will see your small jar of oil overflow beyond measure. You will see your 5 loaves and 2 fish feed a multitude, and you will understand that nothing is too hard for God. Sometimes, we do not need to know how God will do it. We just need to trust that He will. Like the widow, we only need to gather the jars, open our small jar of oil, and let God take care of the rest. Like the boy with the 5 loaves and 2 fish, we only need to offer what little we have and allow God to bless it, because God does not require us to be perfect. He only asks that we have perfect faith in Him. Life, at times, feels like a battle whose outcome we cannot foresee. There are days when you feel strong enough to face anything, yet there are also days when even the gentlest breeze seems enough to shake you. When confronted with adversity, people often ask themselves, do I have the strength to overcome this? We measure our capabilities, compare what we have with the challenges ahead, and then shake our heads in discouragement. Some things, in human eyes, seem utterly impossible. But what man deems impossible is precisely the opportunity for God to reveal His power. Think about this. Can a frail child topple a stone wall? Can a lone soldier stand against an entire army? Can a fragile clay jar withstand the pressure of the ocean? Humans would say no, but God is not bound by such limitations. He can turn the weakest into the strongest, transform the most unexpected circumstances into miracles. As Isaiah 40:29 declares, He gives strength to the weary and increases the power of the weak. There is a story in the Bible that every time I read it, I am astonished anew by God's wondrous power. The story of Gideon in Judges 7 is perhaps the clearest example that God does not rely on human strength to fill His plans. The story tells of a time when the Israelites were oppressed by the Midianites. The enemy was as numerous as locusts, destroying everything in their path. The Israelites, pushed to the brink, were forced to hide in caves to survive. In the midst of this turmoil, God called upon a man named Gideon, a man who was far from extraordinary, a man who even doubted himself. God told Gideon that he would be the one to rescue Israel from the Midianites. Hearing this, Gideon must have laughed in disbelief. A man like him? A man with no remarkable skills, no mighty army, no advanced weapons? How could someone like him make a difference? But God had no doubts. When Gideon gathered an army of 32,000 men, he might have felt some relief. But then God said something unexpected. You have too many men. If you win, you will think that it was by your own strength rather than by my power. So God instructed Gideon to send some of them home. First, anyone who was afraid was allowed to leave. Immediately, 22,000 men departed. Only 10,000 remained. But God said, still too many. He then had Gideon test the remaining men by the way they drank water. In the end, only 300 were left. From 32,000 soldiers, only 300 remained. It was an absurdly small number compared to the vast Midianite army, whose numbers were as countless as the sand on the seashore. How could 300 men possibly defeat such a force? But to God, that number was enough, because victory does not come from numbers, it comes from His power. With only 300 men, Gideon followed God's instructions. They did not need mighty weapons. They had no swords, no arrows, no spears. All they carried were trumpets, clay jars, and torches. And yet, with a simple battle cry, the breaking of jars, and the sound of trumpets, they sent the entire Midianite army into chaos. In their panic, the Midianites turned on each other. Without lifting a single sword, Gideon and his 300 men won the battle because God fought for them. What does this teach us? God does not require us to be strong for Him to use us. He does not need perfect people. He only needs hearts willing to trust Him. Have you ever felt too weak, too insignificant, or too powerless to do something? Have you ever felt that you don't have what it takes to overcome a challenge? If so, remember this: God does not need your strength. He only needs your faith. A young boy in the Bible had nothing but 5 loaves and 2 fish, a small meal, yet when placed in Jesus' hands, it became a feast for over 5,000 people. A poor widow had only a small jar of oil, but when she trusted in God's provision, it became an unending supply. And Gideon, with just 300 men, defeated an entire army without lifting a sword. So what is discouraging you today? What is making you feel like you are not enough? Do you feel too weak to chase your dreams? Too small to make a difference? Too powerless to overcome an obstacle? If so, remember that God does not see your limitations. He sees his own limitless power working through you. The world may set boundaries. People may look at you and think you are incapable. But God is not limited by human expectations. When he moves, nothing is impossible. A trumpet blast can shake an army. A torch can spread confusion among enemies. A small jar of oil can become a miracle. And a person who seems utterly ordinary, when they place their trust in God, can accomplish things beyond imagination. So today, what will you choose to believe? Will you focus on your limitations, or will you trust in the limitless power of God? Life sometimes feels like a hidden trail winding through a dense forest. You stand at its entrance, gazing into the stretching darkness ahead, your heart filled with uncertainty. Will this path lead to a lush green meadow, or will it take you to the edge of a steep cliff? You don't know. You can either step forward in uncertainty or remain frozen in hesitation. Believing that God can perform miracles is one thing, but trusting in his timing and the way he works is another. For God's path is not always clear from the beginning, and his plans often extend far beyond human understanding. We often have the tendency to want control, to know the future, to see security before taking a step. But God says in Isaiah 55, verse 8, "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways." What does that mean? It means that God does not work in ways we expect. It means that sometimes he tells you to walk without showing you the destination. It means that there are moments when he is silent, but that does not mean he is not working. And it means that even when you don't understand everything happening around you, you must still put your trust in him. Think about the mother of Moses in Exodus 2. If you were a mother, would you dare to place your newborn child in a basket and let it float down a river? Probably not. A fragile infant drifting through rushing waters, facing countless dangers, crocodiles, strong currents, the harshness of nature. How could a mother do such a thing? But that is exactly what Moses' mother did. She had no guarantee that her son would survive, no perfect plan to ensure he would be rescued. She only had one thing: faith. Faith that somehow, in a way she couldn't understand, God would take care of her child. And God did the unthinkable. He not only protected Moses, but placed him in the palace, where he was raised and educated as a prince. A child who should have died became the one who would deliver an entire nation. That is how God works. When you see no way, he is already making a way. When he asks you to let go of something without explaining why, it may be because he is preparing something far greater for you. But trusting God is not always easy. People have a tendency to cling to what is familiar, even if it causes them pain. The Israelites once complained in the wilderness. They longed for Egypt, the very place where they were slaves, because at least there they had food. They feared the uncertainty of the wilderness, even though God had promised them a land flowing with milk and honey. And just like them, we often hold on to small things out of fear that if we let go, we will be left with nothing. But remember, God does not need you to understand everything. He only asks you to trust him. When God told Abraham to leave his homeland without revealing the destination, he went. When he told Peter to step out of the boat with no guarantee that he wouldn't sink, Peter stepped out. When he told Gideon to go into battle with just 300 men, Gideon obeyed. And when he told Moses' mother to place her child in a small basket and let him drift away, she did. So today, what is God asking you to do that you don't fully understand? Is he calling you to leave a job that feels secure but isn't truly meant for you? Is he leading you into a relationship that you aren't entirely sure about? Is he asking you to let go of something you've held onto for too long? Whatever it may be, remember that God sees the whole picture while you only see a small piece. Don't let human fear keep you from stepping into his greater plan. for God never fails, and those who trust in him will never be abandoned. Life is like a red dirt road in the rainy season, muddy, winding, sometimes shrouded in darkness, and then suddenly opening up to a lush green hillside. People keep walking, sometimes bewildered, sometimes afraid, sometimes filled with hope, but they do not always know what awaits them ahead. That is also how God leads people. He does not reveal the entire journey, but gives just enough light for each step. And trusting in God before seeing the full path is one of the greatest tests of faith. Who doesn't like certainty? Who wouldn't want a smooth road with clear signposts and a glorious destination shining right before their eyes? But God does not operate according to human reasoning. He does not hand us a detailed map. Instead, he simply says, "Go, and I will lead the way." That is why Isaiah 55:8 says, "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways." It sounds simple, but in reality, it is easy to feel lost. When unexpected events crash into our lives, when carefully laid plans crumble into dust, when a door we were sure God had opened suddenly slams shut, how can we not doubt? How can we not hesitate? Let's return to the story of Moses' mother in Exodus 2. Picture a young mother clutching her infant son in her arms, listening anxiously to every sound outside, fearing that Egyptian soldiers might barge in at any moment. The child is too young to understand what is happening. He only knows that his mother is trembling, silent tears falling onto his chubby cheeks. Moses' mother did not lack love for her son, nor was she without fear. She was terrified, but given two choices, either watch her child be killed before her eyes or entrust him to God, she chose the latter. Setting a newborn adrift on a river is an utterly reckless decision by human logic. Who knew what would happen? The current could carry the baby far away, or a crocodile could snatch him in an instant. Countless dangers lurked in the waters. But there was one thing Moses' mother knew for certain. She had done all she could, and the rest she entrusted to God. And God did his part in a miraculous way. The daughter of Pharaoh found the baby, took pity on him, and brought him into the palace. So you see, God does not always pave a smooth road before us, but he always has a plan far greater than what we can imagine. If Moses' mother had not dared to trust God, how could Moses have later become the great leader of Israel? Trusting God when the path is unclear is a great challenge because it requires us to let go of control. And humans have a natural tendency to hold on to everything tightly. They want to steer their own course, choose their own path, and see every turn in advance so they can be sure they are heading in the right direction. But God does not work that way. He does not need us to understand everything. He only needs us to trust him. Think back to Abraham. When God told him to leave his homeland and go to a land that he would show him, Abraham had no idea where he was going. If it had been someone else, they might have asked a series of questions. Where exactly is this land? How far is it? Is it safe? Is it worth going? But Abraham simply obeyed. He packed up, gathered his family, and set out without any concrete details about the destination. Peter was the same. When Jesus told him to step out of the boat and walk on water, he had no guarantee that he wouldn't sink. He only had one thing, Jesus' word. And so he stepped out. What about you? Today, what is God asking you to do that you don't yet understand? Is he calling you to leave a stable job to step into a field you have never tried before? Is he leading you on a journey where you don't yet see the ending? Is he telling you to enter a relationship you are still unsure about? When faced with such choices, human nature often leans toward hesitation. We want to wait until things become clearer. We want to be absolutely sure we are not making a mistake. But God does not require us to see everything before we take a step. He only wants us to trust, because when we place our trust in him, he will not let us be disappointed. A child holding his father's hand while walking through a dark forest does not need to know exactly where his father is taking him. He only needs to know that his father's hand is still there, warm and steady. And so he walks on. Faith is the same. It is stepping forward even when we do not see the whole road ahead, because we know that the one holding us will never lead us astray. In every person's life, there are moments when we feel so small, so powerless in the face of life's storms. There are days when everything seems to turn against us. Work is frustrating, finances are tight, relationships fall apart, health declines. Sometimes we feel like we're utterly alone in this vast world, desperately clinging to a flickering faith only to be swallowed up by negative thoughts. I will never get out of this situation. I'm not good enough. No one cares about me. These words, seemingly harmless, fleeting thoughts, hold immense power. They can trap us in fear, despair, and failure. But do you know something? God has given us a powerful tool to change our circumstances, to step out of the darkness and into the light. That tool is words. The Bible says the tongue has the power of life and death. Proverbs 18:21. At first glance, this may sound exaggerated, but if you think deeply, you'll realize it's an undeniable truth. Words can build up or destroy, bring life or death, lead a person to great success, or sink them into utter failure. A child raised with words of encouragement from their parents grows up confident, daring to dream and take action. On the other hand, a child surrounded by criticism and ridicule will always doubt themselves, afraid to face life's challenges. Look at the story in 2 Kings 7. At that time, the city of Samaria was in the midst of a severe famine. People were so desperate that they resorted to eating their own children to survive. The situation was so dire that no one believed there was a way out. But then the prophet Elisha stood up and declared, "By this time tomorrow, flour will be sold at a low price at the city gate." A simple statement, yet filled with faith. The doubters laughed at him, saying it was impossible. But what happened? Just as Elisha had declared, the very next day, food flooded the city, and prices dropped so low that even the poorest could afford to eat. That miracle didn't happen because Elisha was extraordinary, but because he understood the power of speaking faith-filled words. When God created the world, he didn't use his hands to shape every detail of the universe. He simply spoke, "Let there be light," and there was light. His words carried creative power, and as his children, we have been given a portion of that power. Have you ever noticed that people who constantly speak negatively often experience negativity in their lives? They always complain about being poor, unlucky, and having no help, and indeed, no good opportunities ever seem to come their way. On the other hand, those who habitually declare good things, even in difficult circumstances, always seem to find a way out. They meet people who help them, they rise from the mud to touch the sky. You might say, "But I can't change my situation just by speaking." You're right, you can't do it on your own, but God can. And when you declare his promises instead of dwelling on negative thoughts, you're inviting him to work in your life. Don't say, "Shh, I will never overcome this." Instead, declare, "I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me," Philippians 4:13. Don't say, "I don't have enough." Instead, declare, "My God will supply all my needs," Philippians 4:19. Don't say, "No one helps me." Instead, declare, "He will never leave me nor forsake me," Hebrews 35. Every day, you have the power to change the way you speak. You can start by choosing encouragement over discouragement. You can make it a habit to thank God even before the miracle happens because you trust that he is always working in your life. When you change the way you speak, you'll notice that your mindset begins to shift. You'll feel more hopeful, stronger, and more prepared to face challenges. But it doesn't stop with just yourself. You can use your words to change someone else's life, too. A single word of encouragement can save someone standing on the edge of despair. A single word of hope can ignite light in another person's heart. A simple prayer can open the door to miracles. Think of a seed. If you plant a seed in the ground, water it, and care for it, over time it will grow into a tree. But if you say, "This seed will never sprout," and neglect it, then yes, it will never grow. Your words are seeds you plant in your life. If you sow words of faith and positivity, you will reap good things. But if you sow words of doubt, fear, and negativity, you will only receive hardship in return. Try this in your own life. Start each day by declaring God's promises. When difficulties come, pause for a moment. Don't rush to complain. Instead, say, "God, I know you are working. I believe that good things are coming." And then watch as miracles begin to unfold, slowly, little by little, in ways you never expected. Because your words, when spoken in faith, can create miracles. Human life is a journey full of surprises. Some days we feel at peace, walking leisurely on familiar paths. But then there are days when storms come suddenly, sweeping away all our plans and hopes. Sometimes, no matter how hard we try, we still cannot change the situation. On those days, people often fall into despair and ask, "Lord, do you see me?" But even in the darkest moments, there is one thing we can always do: pray. Prayer is not a magical spell that instantly makes everything perfect. It is not a free pass to go through life without obstacles. But prayer is the way we surrender our burdens to God. It is how we remind ourselves that we are not alone, that there is one who listens, who sees, and who is working even when we do not realize it. Heavenly Father, I know that nothing is impossible for you. I surrender my struggles and worries into your hands. Help me trust that you are working, even when I cannot see it. Have you ever prayed a prayer like this? Have you ever stood in the midst of life's uncertainties, surrounded by overwhelming worries, and lifted your eyes to heaven saying, "Lord, I don't understand, but I trust you"? That kind of trust is not always easy. It is like the trust of Moses' mother long ago. When faced with Pharaoh's cruel decree to kill all Hebrew baby boys, she did something that seemed utterly reckless. She placed her son in a basket and set him afloat on the river. Who could guarantee that the child would survive? Who could predict that one day he would become Moses, the one who would lead Israel out of Egypt? When she let go of that basket, she had no map of the future. She only had faith. And perhaps you have been in that position too. Times when you had to let go of something you deeply cherished because you had no control over it. A door closed, a relationship broke, an opportunity slipped away. In those moments, are you willing to place your basket in the river, trusting that God will guide it to the other side? I declare victory. I declare the power of God over my life. Every worry, fear, and doubt must leave me, for He is in control of all things. There's a story in the Bible that strengthens my heart every time I read it. It is when the prophet Elijah came to a widow in Zarephath during a time of famine. This woman was preparing the last meal for herself and her son because after that, they would have nothing left to eat. But Elijah told her to use her remaining flour and oil to make a small cake, first offering it to him and then eating afterward. This request seemed absurd. She was already at the brink of starvation, and now she had to give away her last meal to a stranger? Yet she obeyed, and a miracle happened. Her jar of flour was never empty, and her jug of oil never ran dry. She and her son were saved from starvation. Sometimes miracles do not come in the way we expect. God did not suddenly fill her flour jar to the top. Instead, He gave her just enough for each day. That is also how He works in our lives, not always by removing the trials, but by giving us the strength to endure them one day at a time. And so, when we pray, we are not merely listing our requests. We are declaring victory even before we see it. We are proclaiming faith even when there is no visible reason to believe. I thank you for deliverance, for healing, and for the miracles that are coming in my life. In the name of Jesus Christ, amen. Is there something special about this prayer? Yes. It is not a prayer of gratitude for what has already happened, but a prayer of gratitude in advance for what is to come. It is an act of faith. Have you ever tried thanking God before the miracle happens? Have you ever praised Him even when your circumstances have not yet changed? When Paul and Silas were imprisoned, they did not sit there in misery. They did not wait for the prison doors to open before they started worshiping God. No, in the middle of the night, while their hands and feet were still in chains, they began to sing praises. And what happened? A great earthquake shook the prison. The doors flew open and their chains fell off. The miracle did not come before the praise, it came after it. Your prayer can shake the walls of your prison too. Maybe it is the prison of fear, of disappointment, of doubt, of self-imposed limitations. But when you dare to pray, to trust, to declare victory, you will see doors begin to open, chains begin to break. I don't know what you are facing in life right now, but I do know that nothing is impossible for God. And I know that if you sincerely pray, if you put your trust in Him, you will see miracles, though they may not come in the way you expect. Perhaps the miracle is not an immediate change in your situation, but a transformation within you. Perhaps God will not remove the storm, but He will give you peace in the midst of it. So pray, surrender your worries to Him. Thank Him even before the miracle arrives. And one day, when you look back, you will see that he never abandoned you, not even for a single moment. Human life, after all, is like a long journey. There are sunny days and there are stormy days. There are smooth roads that are easy to walk on, and there are rough paths filled with stones and thorns. Sometimes we feel like we are moving forward with strong and steady steps, but other times we find ourselves sitting down, exhausted, unsure whether to keep going or turn back. We hesitate because the road ahead seems too uncertain. We waver because we don't know if we have the strength to make it to the end. And in the midst of these uncertainties, one question echoes: do you dare to trust God? People often say that believing in God is easy. Just read the Bible, pray, go to church every week, and that's it. But the truth is, faith is not that simple. Trusting God is not just a declaration of words. Trusting God means placing your entire life in His hands, even when you don't understand what He is doing. Trusting God is like the mother of Moses, who dared to place her son in a basket and set him afloat on the river, not knowing what would happen next. Trusting God is like Abraham, who was willing to leave his homeland and journey into the unknown simply because of a promise he had yet to see fulfilled. Trusting God is like David, standing before Goliath with just a small stone, yet believing with all his heart that victory was his. Trusting God is like Paul, who despite being beaten and imprisoned, still lifted his voice in praise to God inside a dark, cold jail cell. But faith in God is not just a story of the past. It is also the story of you, of me, of all of us. It is when you face a sickness that the doctors say is incurable, yet you still believe in His healing. It is when you lose your job and have no idea how to provide for your family, yet you trust that God will make a way. It is when you stand at a crossroads in life, uncertain of which direction to take, yet you believe that God will guide you. But how can you trust God in a world full of uncertainties? How can you hold on to faith when everything around you seems to be working against you? How can you walk in faith when the path ahead remains hidden in mist? The answer does not depend on how much faith you have. The answer lies in whom you place that faith in. There was a time when Jesus and His disciples were crossing the sea. As they sailed, a violent storm suddenly arose. The waves crashed against the boat, and water began to fill it. The disciples were terrified, while Jesus remained asleep. In their panic, they woke Him up, crying out, "Teacher, don't you care that we are perishing?" Jesus stood up, rebuked the wind, and commanded the sea to be still. Instantly, the storm calmed. Then He turned to His disciples and asked, "Where is your faith?" This story makes me reflect. The disciples had lived with Jesus, had witnessed His miracles, yet when the storm came, they were still afraid. Why? Because in the face of the storm, they had forgotten one crucial truth: Jesus was in the boat with them. What about you? When the storms of life come crashing in, do you remember that Jesus is still with you? Maybe you are standing before a closed door wondering why God hasn't opened it yet. Maybe you have been praying for a miracle but have seen no change. Maybe you are walking through a season of darkness, unable to see even the faintest glimmer of light. But remember this: God has not abandoned you. He has not forgotten you. He is working, even when you cannot see it. So, no matter what happens, no matter how life twists and turns, will you dare to trust Him? If your answer is yes, then start walking in faith today. Don't just say you believe in God. Live as if you truly trust Him. Don't let fear and worry hold you back. Step out of your comfort zone, surrender your burdens to Him, and allow Him to lead your path. If you are ready to let God work in your life, write Amen in your heart. Not just as a word, but as a commitment that you will trust God even when you don't yet see the miracle. A commitment that you will walk in faith even when the road ahead is unclear. A commitment that you will not give up, because you know that God has never given up on you. And one day, when you look back, you will realize that everything God did in your life was far more wonderful than anything you could have imagined. You will see that even in the moments when you didn't understand, He was there, guiding you, strengthening you, loving you with an unchanging love. So trust Him. Keep walking. Let Him work, because with God, nothing is impossible.